So for those of you who are brand new, and I recognize many APPA members in the house, and thank you very much for supporting this event today. And you're going to get to know Pierre a lot better than you may already. But just for the newcomers to APPA, we are the American Philosophical Practitioners Association, founded in 1999 by some of the folks in this room. We aspire to and do achieve provision of philosophy to individuals, groups, and organizations. We have members in many, many states and countries as well abroad. We're an international organization now. We train philosophers to render these services. And this Agora, this inaugural event, is part of an initiative. It's really the tip of a spear. We have realized that the world needs philosophy more than ever, especially post-pandemic. So we are going to be building all kinds of new avenues of outreach to the public and increasing our footprint in cyberspace and in the real world too. So fasten your seatbelts. There is more coming, but this is basically the beginning of all of that more. And there is no better person with which to begin it than Pierre Grimes. I mean, some of you or most of you have probably read the bio that's up on the site since you signed up for the event. You probably realize that, heck, Pierre, we've known each other for around 30 years now, but you've been in practice 30 years before that. Pierre is the doyen of philosophical counseling in our current generation, is really the godfather, however you want to call him. He got the whole ball rolling. The Europeans have done a great job with this, starting with Achenbach in the early 80s and the Dutch Society later that decade and more around the world now. But Pierre, you were the original. You were the template for this. And so it's really a great pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural Agora as our featured guest. And thank you so much for joining us today.
As they say, my pleasure.
Well, Pierre, I'm going to basically exercise moderator's privilege and ask you a few questions that I would like to hear from you about. And then in due course, we'll open the floor and we'll invite anyone and everyone to pipe up, okay, and interact with you. So first of all, take us back a little bit, all right? Now, are you a dyed-in-the-wool Californian? You've always seemed to me to be a quintessential Southern Californian. Were you actually born and raised in Southern California?
My family got into California when I was 5 years old. I was born in Brussels in Belgium. By the way, I had two sisters, twins. They were born in Shanghai, China. My father, as you could imagine, did a bit of traveling.
Fantastic. I mean, I thought the Pierre name sounded a trifle French, so that would be the Belgian influence, perhaps.
Yes.
But you've spent the majority of your life in Southern California, correct?
Yes.
And a few years back, when we had a wonderful APPA meeting out your way aboard the Queen Mary, docked in Long Beach, and you told us that you had traveled home on the Queen Mary at post World War II. It was a troop ship, right? It brought you back.
That's right.
Incredible. So, Pierre,
after 3 years, yes, please go ahead.
So let's start with your early years as really a healer and a helper. You started off working with addicts, did you not? You were a social worker doing addiction counseling?
Yes, alcoholics.
Specifically alcoholics?
Yeah.
And was that in LA or in San Francisco or?
In San Francisco, yeah. I was going to University of the Pacific at that time, graduate school, and needed a job because it turned out that I had 5 children. And there's a kind of requirement that if you have children, you should get a job to get money to raise them. So I went along with that idea. So in any case, I ended up in San Francisco, and I walked into the office and I said, "Gentlemen, I need a job." They said, "Well, we actually have a position for, no one wants it." I said, oh, well, that sounds like good for me. I said, what is it? They said, we need someone to work with chronic alcoholics who are indigent men, and therefore they live on Skid Row. I said, good. My family happens to have the same religion. My father was Irish American, and he didn't stay too far away from the bottle.
So you go ahead, please.
Yeah, last thing, though. Less than 6 months, they opened up a rehabilitation center in Redwood City, and they needed someone who had counseling experience with alcoholics. It turns out I was the only one. So I landed there, and I asked the attending physician, I said, hey, give me a little hint. What's the best way to work with these people as your experience? He said, Pierre, do anything you want. Nothing will work. You see, that's wonderful. And so that started my work with chronic alcoholics. And it all started with I worked with many people, but I started working with periodic alcoholics. So when they'd come back, I went to the blackboard. We had a big blackboard. And I'd say, let's trace out what you've been doing. So on the board, we'd map out their journey from beginning to end. And they came back again and again. And I said, good heavens, there's a pattern here. It seems to have a unique beginning and a culminating point. There's something meaningful going on here. Well, my whole story will end with one gentleman. He was a PhD chemist. It turned out that every time he reached a peak in his research, he'd go on a binge. And then he'd be brought in weeks later, needed great help, and then he'd be hospitalized. So I said, wait a minute. What do you recall about the beginning and the end? He said, well, I do have one event that maybe I should mention. I don't think it makes any sense, but when I was a kid, we used to play football. And we didn't have any appropriate clothing to safeguard us from injury. And my mother, every time I'd go out to play football out in the street playing football, my mother would put her hands on me and say, son, I just want you either to come home with your shield or without it. I said, oh my God, that's a Spartan. That's a Spartan slogan. He said, yeah. I said, well, notice at the end of every one of your drunks, you were brought in on a stretcher. You came home on your shield. I said, what's the connection? He said, I don't know. He said, maybe that was the only time my mother showed any affection for me. I said, oh. And that started, therefore, my exploration of alcoholism in terms of patterns of that and what started their pattern and ended. And I did a dialogue called Alcibiades, where I stressed that whole dynamic using Socrates with a drunk by the name of Alcibiades. And Yale Journal published it after quite a bit of fuss. And that began the first work for Yale. They said it's the first time they've ever published a dialogue in their journals. I said, thank you. And from that started another article and another, so it went on. That was the beginning.
Is this what drew you toward Plato then, ultimately? Was it your experience with addictions, with alcoholics that got you interested in Plato?
Well, you see, after World War II, I was in the infantry for 3 years. Italy, France, Germany, Austria. And the terrible destruction by Europeans against one another just kept driving me again and again to saying there's something rotten going on. There's something fundamentally puzzling. So when I got to the service, I went to several colleges and quit. And then someone told me, hey, there's a special school you really should go to, St. John's College. All you have to do is sit around and read great books for 4 years. I said, oh, that's just what I need. Where do the great books come from? They said, well, it captures the entire development, intellectual development of Europe and, of course, the U.S. I said, that's it. So the first year was all Platonic. And when I got into, actually, my first day at St. John's, I went into the library and I found a green book, separate book. And I pulled it off the shelf and I said, this is really curious. It's a book by Plato called Parmenides. So I went out and I met the dean walking down the avenue, and I said, hey, look at this book. He said, oh, that's just an exercise, Pierre. Don't bother with it. And I said to myself, I don't believe you. No way. And so that started my interest in Plato.
Fantastic. So St. John's College is still doing this,
Yes. Oh, yes.
And they're one of the few that offer great books as the core of the educational system. So you went through that. Fabulous. Let me ask you to fast forward now to the 1960s. You were in on it. I'm a baby boomer, Pierre, and we were influenced, the baby boomers who came of age in the 1960s. And I suspect there's a few of us in the room. You were the generation that influenced us. Alan Watts, how did you come to know him?
Well, when I was in St. John's, my last year, I was really disgusted with where the intellectual tradition is going in Europe. And so I sent a letter to Joe Campbell, and I said, blah, blah, blah. He said, come on down, let's have a cup of coffee. So I went down to Greenwich Village where he lived, and we had started having coffee together. And I said, hey, Joe, you have to tell me one thing. Where is philosophy really going? And what I mean by philosophy, I said, it has to continue the Platonic spirit. He said, Pierre, it's dead. It's going on nowhere. No one is really into the heart of Plato. He said, but I have a friend of mine, Alan Watts, who's starting a school in San Francisco. And it's at the University of the Pacific. He says it's called the American Academy of Asian Studies. I said, what's so hot about that? He said, all of the teachers are native teachers. They have a Tibetan yoga, Lama Tata, Jiming Shen, a Taoist, Haridas Chaudhry, chosen by Sri Aurobindo to come to be his philosopher in our school. I said, oh my God, what an opportunity. So I said, let's go. I said, goodbye. So I got in my 1935 LaSalle convertible, one-eyed dog, and zoomed to San Francisco.
So you ended up hanging out with Alan Watts on his houseboat in Sausalito, or what were you doing up there with him?
Well, you see, he was on the staff. And what happened is that at one day, he said, what we really need is someone who's willing to do a paper on Gestalt psychology. I said, I'll do a paper. So I did it. And he said, Pierre, you're now a lecturer in comparative philosophy, East and West. You now have a scholarship for your graduate school. So his family and my family joined together on many trips, especially to Mount Tamalpais over there in San Mateo, Marin. And every once in a while, we'd get together and enjoy it. And he's the one, by the way, who introduced me to LSD. At that time, it was legal, of course. And all you had to do in those days is go to a pharmacy and say you're doing experiments and you have some pigeons and you're using LSD. They'd say, okay, here. You know, so a lot of my friends ended up raising pigeons.
Yeah. And in those days, it was all coming out of Owsley's lab, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, that was the original. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we were in that pipeline back east, Pierre. Not too many of us, but a few of us. And some of us even came back, which was the major challenge at times. But this is amazing that you were on the leading edge of all these things. Now, what specifically, since you have been really single-handedly the founder of philosophical midwifery, Socratic midwifery, what was the moment? Was there a moment of illumination when you transformed the Theaetetus into an actual living modality, or did this evolve over time with you?
Well, that experience I mentioned occurred in 1960, and then I decided I was puzzled. I didn't know whether I should be a psychologist or a philosopher. I got a PhD, of course. And I thought maybe I should go to another school and take a look at what psychology is doing. So I was accepted at the New School of Social Studies in New York. So I said, family, let's go. So I went there. And after 1 year, nearly two, I guess, I saw the dismal place of where psychology was. I mean, they had no role for mind. They had no role for any depth work at those days. And while they often would mention Carl Jung, no one really understood him in those days. His works were just becoming well published at those days, but didn't enter into the mainstream of psychology until several years later. So I saw the shallowness of it, and I said, well, that's goodbye. I think I'll go back to California. And luckily enough, there was an APPA meeting, American Philosophical Association meeting in Santa Monica. And I flew there and I said, I think I'm looking for a job. I'd like to get a philosopher's job. I'll take the first offer. So I did it. And I got into, many people told me I was wasting my time, but I entered into a college called junior college. And my friend said, once you get into junior college, your academic world is finished. No one wants to talk to you if you were taught in junior college. I said, I don't mind. I went there. I was interviewed. The president of the school said, you're in. I said, how many colleagues do I have? He said, none. You're the only one. I said, I'm the only philosopher there. I can make up my own. He said, yeah. I said, thank you. So I stayed there for 50 years. Until finally I decided maybe I should, before I reached middle age, I thought maybe I'd change.
Well, I think you're just reaching middle age now by the sound of it, Pierre. But seriously, you then met Regina along the way, right? You met Regina Uliana and started doing some really good clinical work with philosophical midwifery. So how did that evolve?
The classes I was then teaching, I taught Plato. I made up courses, one course on the philosophy of love, Renaissance philosophy. I really had a great deal of freedom because I was in that wonderful age where no one believed anything was worthwhile anyhow. So whatever you do is relative. So I said, fine, I loved it. So the students would come together after class and we'd have talks. And finally I said, let's let's have a little club. Let's start a new club. So the Noetic Society came out of that club, because the next 5 or 6, 7 years, it worked very well at the school. But then I realized that but we needed our own existence, and that started the Noetic Society and became organized and had an off-campus group. And then in 1978, we got it incorporated, and it's been going on ever since.
Every Friday, is it not?
Yes, every Friday and Sunday.
And Sunday. You are relentless, Pierre, except when we get you to New York. You get a weekend off when we put you to work on this coast. But basically, it's an amazing accomplishment. For those who don't know, and I think many in the room know about your books, there are quite a few, but also Philosophical Midwifery is, I think, a cornerstone of your path. And at the moment, Pierre, you have one of the most expensive books on Amazon. I know that Regina and Barbara and others are bringing out or reissuing it as, as a new publication, a new edition. But at the moment, it's priced at $1,500, which is makes it a very high-end collector's item. So congratulations on that. I do hope that it's going to be forthcoming shortly at the normal price, so more people can read it and benefit from it. But it's a really an amazing work. I've got to congratulate you for it, and you and Regina both.
Thank you. Yes, you see, I would say the most significant thing, though, was to recognize rather early that the Platonic tradition emerged out of Plato's relationship with our good friend Socrates. But Plato is not Socrates. I mean, the description of Socrates and the Alcibiades and the dialogue called the Symposium, where Alcibiades describes Socrates, we have what I later called from my friend Lama Tata. He said, "Hey, that's a Tibetan yoga." He said, "Look, one cloak in the middle of the winter, barefoot, walks in the snow, right? Is indifferent to those extremes. He meditates, because Alcibiades also described him meditating for 24 hours at one spot without moving." Lama Tata said, "Hey, he's one of us." Well, and by the way, the most important part, Alcibiades described Socrates as someone who would engage people in dialogue. And they went through, what personal drama they went through. They'd end up crying and bemoaning themselves in the middle of the middle of a public event, all through Socrates' dialogues with him. So I said, where are those in Plato? Where's the parallel? Because he spent nearly most of his life talking about the role of sophistry, the damage that sophistry has on the public, and the origin of that. And of course, he died, Socrates died when Plato was 26, so he didn't have too long a life with him. But that tradition, you see, from the beginning, I said, hey, Plato is great, no doubt. But Socrates was the master. And so I became interested. I said, look, there are two things that are missing in Plato, and that is the kind of dialogues, the dialectic that Socrates must have been using and that Plato modified. And more importantly, there's a tradition of meditation that must have been alive, so alive that he could live it. And so I was drawn, therefore, to meditation. And I Jiming Shen, the Taoist, and he brought me into Taoism and meditation. And I used to go from Zen center to Zen center to different sessions, and decided that, hey, enough talk, let's get into meditation. So that's what I wanted to recover it. I wanted to see what was really going on. Wanted to see what is it about life that is so pernicious to many, and a failure. Why are we in the grip of it all? Then one day, most important day, the group that I was with, Noetic Society, we were reading Homer together. And oh my God, I'm very fortunate that several of our members are very skilled and insightful into Greek, classical Greek. And they opened up one passage and they said, "Hey, look at this. Isn't this some?" I said, what? He's using the word self again. I said, self? Wait a minute. Well, Barbara Stecker had access to TLG people. And she said, let me make a run and see how many times the word self appears in Homer. And it turned out 500. So, whew. Well, you know, Homer describes Achilles, and he describes the nature of his problem. And I said, oh my God, look at this. It fits midwifery. The dynamics he shows about his early life is exactly what we discover in our own midwifery. And further, in Book 18, of course, is the great experience of Achilles' enlightenment experience, magnificent as it is. So that started a nice comparison. I got some people that, that's a dirty trick, but I got a lot of people saying, let's see whether we can take a look at the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus has an enlightenment experience, and compare the two. And we can make judgments about things like that. And that was really delightful. And I invite you all to do the same, because it's no doubt about the depth of one and the shallowness of the other. And I won't tell you which one is shallow and which is not.
I won't ask, Pierre, but there's clearly, you are also then in the West, I think the first, among the first in this pioneering generation that you belong to, but you belong to it as a philosopher, not just as an acid head. So basically this fundamental linkage between Hellenism and Buddhism, you understood this and experienced it very deeply. And so you became a Dharma successor in a Korean tradition, correct?
That's right. I'm a Dharma successor. Yeah. They're called a master Dharma teacher.
So I only discovered this way later. I should have talked to you decades earlier, but I learned about it in Japan when Daisaku Ikeda had commissioned a silkscreen of Raphael's School of Athens to cover the main stage of the Makaguchi Auditorium in Tokyo. And I asked him, Mr. Ikeda, there's so much Buddhist art in Japan. There's no shortage of Buddhist art, and it's a Buddhist university. Why did you choose Raphael's School of Athens as a centerpiece for the main auditorium? And he looked at me and he said, because they were all basically bodhisattvas. He saw the Hellenic philosophers as givers of law, as givers of virtue, as awakeners of virtue. And so he saw this as a parallel to the Mahayana tradition, right? The bodhisattva way. And you were onto this much, much earlier. But isn't it incredible that East meets West in this kind of fusion?
Yes, matter of fact, I worked with a Korean Buddhist, Myobang, and we started a temple here in Southern California where we joined Plato and Buddhism, and it went on for several years. Then, because of certain circumstances, it ended. But it was easy to move with these people over similar ideas. The difference, by the way, was in that one wonderful word, logos. That's the difference. You see, they have everything, but they don't have the logos. And that, of course, can be found in Plato's Parmenides, where I spent several years. And the people I know have become friends with that great dialogue of Plato's, the Parmenides, because that's the unfoldment of the logos.
Yes, we have friends in China, Pierre, who are now philosophical practitioners, Chinese philosophers and professors of philosophy. And we had a talk about this one day in Nanjing, and the pioneer in China said that he thought that the best translation of Tao into English would be logos. But his Western training had attuned him to this. So it kind of reinforces what you're saying. We're thinking about a kind of lawfulness woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Let me ask you a couple more questions before we open it up. There's some really great people in attendance today from all over the place, and I want to give them the mic. But I would like to ask you to, first of all, if you could, in a brief way at least, or in a sharp way, explain to us the difference that you do in dream work, because I know that you do dream work, and I've seen you do dream work, and it's amazing. But how would you characterize your approach to dream work, which is obviously philosophical, distinguish it from the more Freudian or the more Jungian or the more straightforwardly psychological work that's done with dreams? What's the difference?
It comes down to Plato. In the Apology, the charge against Socrates, as you all know, is that he did not believe in the gods of the state, but in other new spiritual things instead. The Greek is not spiritual. The word is daemon. Now, those of you who know that idea of daemon, Socrates describes it in the Apology as that voice that comes to him, never tells him what to do, but always tells, hold it, hold it. Then in the Apology, he goes on to describe it and saying it's through the daemon and dreams that have brought me to all of the spiritual goals that I have reached. He points out that in an amazing statement, he says, I have gone through the life of the spirit that is comparable to all mankind from every tradition. What a statement to include, you know? Now, therefore, he links daemons and dreams. What's the relation between the two? Dreams never tell you what to do. Dreams always give you a predicament based upon your own functioning life. It can capture where you are in your present. It presents it to you for your reflection. And by seeing into that reflection and using the logos, no interpretation other than what's contained within the dialogue itself or the dream itself, then you can then understand it. Now, yes, it takes a while to do that, but look here, it takes a while to learn every language. To learn the language of the dream master, as I call it, is it's a wonderful way of understanding mankind, because everybody has a story. Everyone has a riddle. Everyone is a walking mystery. Everyone wants to understand themselves. It's through dreams that every dream, and I have been doing them for a few years, I've never encountered a dream that was not unfolding to the individual the nature of the crisis they faced in their everyday life. And it could draw from one's own past those images that become the symbols in the dream, which have unique understanding to the dreamer. And it invariably, therefore, can present to the individual the very nature of their struggles and their problem in a very, very clear way. Wait a minute, how clear? When you understand the dream, you can see its analogy to your present. Oh, and one more thing. It can show you the roots of your problem, then the difficulty you are facing, and unsuspected false beliefs about the self.
Back to the pathologos.
The pathologos. And when, bringing that together and say, that's man's predicament. He doesn't understand that he has been brought by his own family and culture with their beliefs, and they're passed on in a way in which very few people understood, but nonetheless quite effective and thorough, so that it becomes unsuspected beliefs that then bind them to the clan. You can even say man's everyday experience is a shadow of our primitive past, because a pathologos, a false belief about the self, is a binding force that allows each child to recognize in the family that they are primarily the way to survive. They gain a role, they gain a status, they then see themselves as carrying on that mission. Wait a minute, that's survival. And at one time in our past, that's what we needed to survive. But now we separate from the family, yet we carry along the teachings. And that's the basic predicament or the tragicomicality of everyday life.
Pierre, you're so articulate. It's really a pleasure to listen to you. And your journey is illuminating and inspiring for all of us. Before I open up the floor, and I'm sure there are people out here who would love to jump in, and I heartily encourage anyone to grab the mic. I'll call for hands in a moment, but I can't resist one more, much more mundane and much less transcendental question. But I have to ask you: you're 98 years old at this point?
Well,
more or less.
That's right. But I'm just getting out of middle age.
You're right, as we understood, sure. But what's your secret, Pierre? I mean, we always have to ask someone who is this brilliant, at 98 years old. So, what is your secret to such a great life?
No, I don't want to pass this around, right? So keep it quiet. Live with a good woman.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pierre. I would love to invite anyone now who wants to pick up their hands. Michael, okay, you're very quick on the draw. And then Peter. All right, so that's great. Michael, I'm inviting you to unmute. Please go ahead. Michael Laster, a friend of ours from New York. Go ahead, Mike. The floor is yours.
Hey there, Lou. Thanks for hosting this. Nice sunburst guitar in the back. Thanks, Pierre, for the great talk. My question was about, two questions. One about Alan Watts and his situation, because obviously he's a highly, highly realized individual, but at the same time, he was an alcoholic, which goes to show that, being enlightened is not like some sort of inoculation against the various vices and temptations of life. So what is your definition of enlightenment? And do you have anything to share about like Alan Watts as an individual in that regard? And my second question is your thoughts on Ken Wilber and integral theory.
Alan Watts is really a very profound individual. And he's funny as hell.
Yeah.
We used to sit around during the classes and we would take advantage of a few minutes before class and we'd try to see whether we could come up with a question, because we know if we could come up with a good question for him and just bring it to him, we would watch him. He would percolate with it. He'd walk back and forth, and he'd suddenly weave together from that very question a depth that surprised all of us. And he could do that with Chinese thought, Buddhism, Hinduism. He did it so beautifully. And well, his being an alcoholic, there are many Chinese sages that were also drunks, alcoholics. But okay, I'll tell you a story. We were going, his family, my family, we were going to go up on Mount Tamalpais and do a little fun and bring the kids and let them run here and there. So we emptied the car. We had all the goodies and we brought them out to the table. And as we passed one tree, Alan would say, "Now this tree," and he would start off very much like The White Goddess, if you're familiar with that great work. The lore he could spin was quite amazing. And it caught us, my wife and I, it caught us up. And this is, of course, his first wife. She was a mathematician, very fine woman. And she paused and she said, by the way, Alan, that's not the kind of tree it is. It happens to be a very, he said, "Oh, what the hell?" He says, "That's a good story anyhow." I said, "Oh, I loved it."
Okay, Pierre, we're going to move on because we have more hands up. So one question per participant for the moment. Peter, you're up next. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Good to see you again, Lou. I went through your seminar, certification seminar several years ago. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And Pierre, thank you, and pleasure to meet you. I'm actually in San Diego. I grew up in Boston, but I'm in San Diego right now. So also been out here for about 20 years. I have one question, and I'm not sure if it's out of our lane, but it's kind of in the same vein as Pierre. You asked Joseph Campbell, where is philosophy going? So my question is this. Prior to this talk today, I was rereading chapter 1 of Will Durant's A Story of Philosophy, and it's the chapter on Plato. And bottom line is, everything that we're doing in America today with the state and the organization of the state and the way that the state is running and the demagogues that are in power on both parties, I would propose, it seems like we're doing everything wrong. Complete opposite of Plato's Republic. And so my question to you, sir, is, and I apologize if you feel like I'm putting you on the spot, but where is the United States of America going? Where is the state going if it has been degraded so much that statesmanship no longer exists and all it is demagogues who are just after the politics and the spoils of office? Thank you.
The Greeks had the Eleusinian mysteries. And the Eleusinian mysteries, they would urge all of their citizens to join in this fabulous ceremony called the Eleusinian mysteries. The active element in the mysteries was LSD, a variation of LSD, ergot from rye plant. They required their citizens to spend at least 6 months in preparation for this LSD experience. It went on for 2,000 years. It shaped their culture. And with Homer, it shaped it in a dimension that transformed society. The United States is now going through a period which is introducing to a drug culture. That's an Eleusinian culture. What we need to do is establish a kind of logos that can make these experiences people have into a meaningful context within which they can explore themselves and their human thought and create what they need to see, which is their role in the manifest destiny of man. That's philosophy.
Pierre, you're very far-sighted and irredeemably optimistic about this. I would shudder to think what would happen if the folks in the White House and the Congress all started dropping acid without any preparation. I think it could only make matters worse. But your answer in the long run may indeed prove to be sound. Riccardo Rapetti. Rick, please unmute yourself.
Yes, great. Excellent talk, Pierre. One quick question.
Could you speak up, Rick, please? Could you boost your volume a little?
How's that? Is that better?
Much.
Okay, sorry about that. Quick question. I've been practicing meditation and philosophy and all that stuff for decades, but I would love to hear from you. Could you explain what you think or how or why you think, which I do believe you do think, that meditation, which is something Socrates did, is itself a form of philosophical practice? You know, for those of us who think only analytic philosophy and things like that are.
You see, the way to answer is the simplest way to become profound, all right, is right now to say to yourself, do I have a self? What is the self? When I look out and I see everything that I see, I don't see the self. It has no shape or form. But yet, there must be something going on. As Xenophanes, the first philosopher, the teacher of Parmenides, said, what is it that is seeing and hearing and thinking right now? You see, that's a natural koan. That's the way to get into meditation. What is it that is meditating? What is that is doing the thinking? What is it that's doing when I look out and I see things? What's really seeing? How is it? Is there any place there for the self? No one can describe the self when they finally start this analysis. And then slowly they discover something quite remarkable, that there are no qualities to the self. By the way, the most startling thing about philosophy and the self is that in the Parmenides' first hypothesis is not what after all is the one. In the Greek, it is what after all is the one self. The whole dialogue is about the self, its presence. Now, in the first hypothesis, it's all about the one self. The other 8 hypotheses deal with, you see, if there is a one self, what do we mean by one? What do we mean by the way, there are 5 different ideas of the one. Each one of them will create its own world of thought, its own predicament, its own logos. Different
Pierre, this is the beginning of a very profound discourse, and we're going to leave it here and ask Rick to follow up on what you've said, because he knows how to follow up. And with your permission, I'll move to the next question. All right. We have quite a few hands up, so we want everyone to have a voice today. Going in order, Jorn Kroll, our dear friend from San Francisco Bay Area. Please, Jorn, welcome. Nice to see you. Unmute yourself.
Hi, Pierre. And hi, Lou. Short question, because the other ones who want to have questions answered too. Pierre, what, in your opinion and based on your experience, is the most important thing, issue, or consideration in philosophical counseling?
The self.
To know the self. This.
Because everyone's problem can be traced to a false idea that they do not suspect that they hold true. Therefore, we're victims of a kind of ignorance that's so fundamental, yet it's primal. And until we can separate ourselves from these false illusions of the self, we're caught.
But don't we have a problem then? Because I think the true self is not accessible through discursive talking.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Of course it's not discussable. It has no predicates, but it has a presence.
Yes. So what's left for philosophy to do then?
Yeah, the question is, maybe we should learn how to smile a bit and discover the roots of the self. What an amazing journey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorn, for that. And I think we're still answering Rick also at the same time. This is Pierre, you're multitasking in this Q&A. Kevin, you are up next. Please unmute and go ahead. Nice to see you. Tell us where you're from in case we've forgotten.
Hi, Lou.
Hi, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm in the state of Virginia. Pierre, it's nice to speak with you. I was hoping I could ask you something about the following. I was fortunate enough to be connected to a library that was able to get me a loan of your book for a while. As Lou mentioned, it's very pricey. And I was fortunate to read it for that reason. And in my reading, I noticed that something that seemed to be unique to Socratic midwifery was that the pathologos, these false conceptions, you found that they were connected to a positive moment, like the one that you expressed earlier when you were talking about the guy who was brought home on the stretcher. It's a moment in which it's connected to another person and appearing beautiful to them, as opposed to a traumatic event. And I'm wondering if you could discuss the significance between this moment of beauty or positive moment as opposed to trauma in Socratic midwifery.
Well, you see, it's not in Plato, but you can find it in Homer. You see, Homer has detailed all of the dynamics that we found earlier, but we saw it completely in a beautiful expression in Homer. Now, let me go back to your earlier question. It's difficult to believe, but we have been conned as children. How does a pathologos begin? You see, The parent has to capture the child when they're in an open and free state. There's never any violence and any imposition of a pathologos. On the contrary, the parent, in order to pass on this tradition, has to themselves appear sincere, truthful, beautiful. Hey, you know what? It's an image of enlightenment. The child then sees their parent in a way they never saw them before. It is so moving to see someone ideally being presented to you in your own experience, that it has a profound effect upon you. And you realize everything you thought before about them must be wrong. And therefore, everything can be viewed through this new way that they're now encouraging you to believe. So no, there's no sin that brought about. There is no punishment. There's no violence. It's a thing of beauty. It's a thing when a person is being most themselves. By the way, they do not, no parent is aware of the consequences of this introduction of the belief. That they haven't got the faintest idea that they're carrying along something they themselves have been brought to believe. I spoke with an 11-year-old boy with his mother once, and he then brought this scene up. And his mother said, "Oh my God, I never knew it had that effect." She said, "Wait a minute. Would you talk to my mother?" I said, "Sure." So the kid's grandmother came, and she caught what we were doing, and she said, "Okay, that's enough, goodbye." But gave enough information so you could see the same thing reappearing in exactly a similar way, not same, similar. Goes on generation and generation. I believe it goes back to the caves.
It may go back to Eden, Pierre. But thank you for that response. Karen, you have been very patient. We appreciate it. Please unmute. Karen Kuss is up next. Go ahead.
Okay, I have one particular question for you, Pierre. You mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned having a connection with St. John's College and the Great Books program there and so on. And now you're located in Southern California. So I've mentioned this a couple times with Lou, so I'm going to ask the connection. Is there any interaction you've had with Thomas Aquinas College in Southern California?
No.
No. Okay.
Yes and no. I'm working with a gentleman who is now going through the PhD program there.
They don't have a PhD program.
They have the wrong school.
But Thomas Aquinas College they based themselves after St. John's curriculum, Great Books.
Oh.
They started in the 70s.
Good.
And
No.
I was just wondering if you had any interaction at all with them.
No.
What motivates the question, Karen?
Just a refresh. Let's put it this way: a refreshing willingness to talk philosophy. Let's say that they're very different, coming at very different angles. They are more. They follow Aristotle rather than Plato. Let's put it very simply that. But I can just picture you there and engaged in a very deep conversation. That's all.
Let me answer you. I'm coming out in probably a month or so with a new book called Socrates and Jesus, a dialogue in heaven. The basic premise is Socrates tells Jesus, maybe we are the cause of a great deal of distress and difficulties among these people called our followers because we never left anything in writing. We left it all to interpreters. And so the dialogue, therefore, goes through the interpreters of Plato and the interpreters of Jesus. And curiously enough, the major interpreter of Plato is Aristotle. The interpreter of Jesus is Paul. And both brought something unique and different than their master. And that's the part of the dialogue. It's going to come out. You might enjoy it.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen. And we see your APPA certificate, if I'm not mistaken, prominently behind you. Thank you.
Yeah. There's there it. That's exactly right.
It's great that you've given it some pride of place. We didn't curate this in advance. Thank you so much for that. Much appreciated. But I just need to add that because of Aristotle and his enormous influence on the Roman Church and also on Islam, in Islamic philosophy, we have a lot of friends in the Roman Catholic world and the Islamic world who also find Aristotle as a segue into philosophical practice and are, very well disposed to what we do just for that reason. Because after all, it's a lineage, as Pierre has already reminded us, it is a lineage. And this leads to a tremendous potential for a renewed kind of cooperation among these great branches of Abrahamic faiths that are still half the world's population.
Very good.
So we're not done yet. We have a few more rows to hoe before we reach the full potential. Okay, thanks a lot, Karen. It's great to see you, Hendrik. You've been very patient too. Are you still in Singapore? It must be some ridiculous hour. If so, please unmute and go ahead. Nice to see you.
Hey guys, I'm not in Singapore anymore. I'm currently, I've just moved to Scarborough in England, which is an extraordinarily beautiful place. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Lou, I don't know whether you recall, but I had a great time when I did the course with you guys in New York some years ago. But I spent my life in economic activity. So I spent my life working as a IT professional and an economics or a businessman. And so it was quite late in my life that I came to philosophy and tried to understand philosophy, and also trying to make philosophy not only just work for myself in trying to understand the world, but also in how it might help other people that I encounter understand the world. So I'm in a lucky position, I suppose, that I have 2 copies of Pierre's book, hard copies of Pierre's book, which means I'm an extraordinarily rich man. Right. So Pierre, you said that you started off by offering counseling because you wanted to feed 5 children. I don't have to do that anymore. So I'm inclined to want to help people without a numerical reward or a financial reward. Would you say that my mindset's right, or should I pursue this as a business, or where am I? What am I to do with this? Do I just look for people who need help and see if I can help them, or am I trying to help? I'm confused about where I am for this whole process. Am I trying to help myself rather than help other people? Do I really have something to offer other people as a philosopher? Just give me. I read your book again if I have to, but give me a hint.
I haven't any advice at all. I think being what is called a philosopher, sooner or later, people are going to notice you, and they're going to have to decide whether they want you to participate in some way in what they're doing. But I don't have any advice at all. Be yourself and see what happens.
Well, I think that's great advice, Pierre. Pardon me. Be yourself and see what happens goes a long way.
Oh, yeah.
So I hope that's helpful, Hendrik. And thank you very much for being with us today. It's great to see you again. I would like to introduce another friend. We also have 2 questions in the chat room, and we'll get to them presently. Before we do that, I would like to invite a very dear friend to unmute himself. That's Cesare Civetta, who is the director of the Beethoven Festival Orchestra here in New York and Manhattan, a dear friend to whom I also owe a great debt, because Caesar has been running during the pandemic a Sunday afternoon oasis where every week he presents a beautiful 1-hour documentary on a great composer, performer, conductor, including himself, and illuminates for us all the bright facets of music, which, Pierre, you yourself do as well. And so Caesar's model has been so successful that it is partly due to you, my friend, the maestro, that this inaugural Agora takes place. It's really your idea transposed back into a philosophical domain. You're in denial, Caesar. This is the template that you've created. So please unmute yourself and be known.
Well, good afternoon, and I am so grateful for this event. It is overwhelming, and what an inspiration. And I really have to thank Mike Laster, because if you recall, Lou, he's the one that put the bug in your ear several months ago about this. And now it's a reality, it's manifest. But oh my goodness, I am just so inspired. I do not have a question, but I have a proposal that maybe the title of today's event has to be changed to affix the words Part 1, because there's no way that you can just have one episode of this series for Pierre. It has to be a Part 2, a Part 3, 4, 5, and 6. But thank you so much for the inspiration. And congratulations, and I'm just high. This thing has got me high. Thank you very much.
Well, you mean you haven't been nibbling on any goodies? You just got high from this alone?
Just from listening and watching, I'm just so inspired. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, Caesar, thank you so much. You're a great friend, and you've been a huge inspiration, as you know, personally and professionally. So it's great that we've been able to join forces like this. You're right that Michael did plant this bee in my bonnet, but the APPA directors also have been planning to do something to bring philosophy back more prominently into the public arena. So this is only a debut. I mean, Pierre has so much to offer. We're not going to leave it here. We have to start with Pierre. But we'll be doing this every month. And Pierre, I assure you, will be invited back. So thank you, Maestro. It's so great to see you again. And nice to invite you for a change. You're always inviting me to unmute. Now the shoe is on the other foot, my friend. So great that you came. Thank you. Thank you again. Patrizia, our dear colleague from Italy. Please go ahead, Patrizia. Unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so, well, first of all, of course, I can agree totally with Civetta, with Maestro Civetta, because this cannot be only one event with Pierre. It should go on in other part, because, he has too much to share and too much to transmit. So really, it's such an emotion to listen to Pierre, really. We have here to learn from you and to Yes, so I have only to say to you, Pierre, thank you, because it's such a great thing to listen to you, to be with you now. Just a question, just a small question. I know that your roots and your philosophical roots and your practice go deep into Greek, of course, and Plato and Socrates and their dialogues and Homer, and you have mentioned them during all your lecture. But can I ask you if other European philosophers have been influential to you, have transmitted, which other sources, apart from the the ancient Greek tradition, which is for all of us as philosophical counselor, of course, are structural. I mean, we all refer to Socratic dialogue in our practice, and to Plato, and to all the dialogues, Crito and Parmenides and Theaeteto for the midwifery. But of course, all of us have some other strong sources in the modern contemporary philosophy, some of us West or Eastern. What about other philosophers? For example, Hegel, the Hegelian dialogue, the dialectic, the concept of self and the logo. Has been Hegel inspiring you, Pierre, or some other European philosopher? Some good Belgian one, for example, or some French contemporary, or just this question. If you have some other inspiring author that has followed your experience during all these years. And of course, I could go on asking many questions, but there's no time. That's why you have to come back. And thanks to Lou, because you have organized this thing that, as usual, it's a great occasion for all of us.
Mm.
So thank you.
You see, you mentioned people like Hegel. You know, I spent a nice period of time with Hegel, and including, of course, his philosophy of history. Because in that philosophy of history, he brings together in his introduction, which is some 90 or so pages, his whole philosophy. And he captured history, especially European history, in such a dramatic way that it left a great impression upon me, because you know, I remember those great quotes of his, like the blank pages of history are peace. That God shows himself in the will to power. See that he is part of that tradition that others have carried with him, for the image of power and the will and the power that he invokes and he brings forth with such clarity has inspired many people and many tyrants.
Unfortunately.
Yes, and would you not agree that that continuation of that, of course, went on and brought about Karl Marx? And like right now, China gave up its traditions and wiped out its past to continue the tradition of Karl. Now, you mentioned contemporary thinkers. I think may have lost his name. Too bad. He's such a great influence on me. But he did this great work called On the History of Communism, on freedom and thought.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps some of you know his name.
Levi. We can. Carlo Levi.
Could you repeat that, please?
Levi.
Oh, no. Oh, Levi.
Put it in the chat room. If anyone comes up with a name, just put it in the chat room so we can read it.
Levi.
But Pierre, it seems to me that you are a living kind of example of what Alfred North Whitehead said about the history of Western civilization, 2,000 years of footnotes to Plato. So I think we don't escape from that. Even though the existentialists stood, Plato's formula on its head, they're still in Plato's shadow, are they not?
Yes, I would important now, though, to say Carlo Levi is certainly one of the major figures in my past that woke me up. When I got out of World War II, I was in a kind of a psychic shambles, and I got a hold of Carlo Levi's works, and the way he was able to capture what I experienced throughout Europe in those days was so graphic that it brought me into seeing that there are certain people who are awake and need to be studied.
Yeah.
So that, in one way, that woke me up. So Of Fear and Freedom was his great work. He did another one called Christ Stopped at Ebola. But just to answer you, go ahead.
Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you so much, Patricia. It's always great to see you. Grazie. And you pronounce Caesar's name the best. I'd never heard anybody say Maestro Civetta with such elan and panache. I think Caesar's very delighted to hear you pronounce his name because you do it properly, unlike most of us New Yorkers. But anyway, thank you. We're going to come back to George, but before we do, Luis, you have put a great question in the chat room, so please unmute yourself. Pierre Luis Garcia Hernandez asks, what does philosophical counseling do differently from psychotherapy?
The essential element in psychotherapy is the recognition of anxiety as the core problem of mankind. In midwifery, we don't see anxiety as the center. We see beliefs. And therefore, we are introducing the role of the mind in understanding the mind. We have to become friends of the mind to discover the mind. Psychotherapy, insofar as it stays with the idea of anxiety as central to man's conflict, only touches and touches lightly, I should say, on the predicament of mankind.
Okay, that's a great answer, Pierre, and thank you for that. Michel de Gastine from Paris asks, Pierre, have you ever met Professor David Norton of the University of Delaware, who wrote about the daemon also in terms of how he saw the concept of Buddhahood? So that's a parallel path that Professor Norton has followed. So you have not made his acquaintance, apparently.
No.
Okay. Thank you. Rob G, I'll go one more down to, there are a few people now in the chat room. Rob G asks, what are Plato's forms in relation to the good life? And what is a way to understand them? That's in the chat room, Pierre. What are Plato's forms in relation to the good life? And what is a way to understand them? That's a great question.
One of the problems in Plato is that we translators have anglicized certain words and ignored others. And among them is this very word. Another one is, of course, we mentioned daemon, but among them, forms is one of the central ideas in certain translations. Those are the Jowett translations where that very word plays its major role. And you can see the difference when you take a look at the way he translates the Symposium, and he uses the word form. But you see, form is the eidos. Now, an eidos is a mistake to call that and translate it as ideas, because in the modern world, there's a fundamental difference between a concept and an idea. If you're using the Greek expression as eidos, look here. What are eidos? Okay. When one experiences the brilliant light of being, as Plato calls it in the Republic, that's, of course, a mystical experience of the divine luminosity. People then who experience it then quickly jump and say, that's beauty itself. No, that's reality itself. No, that's truth. Wait a minute. All of those are words that one can draw from that experience. Plato calls all of those eidoses. They are all ideas. They are eternal because that experience of divine luminosity, I assure you, is eternal, magnificent, startling, and ultimately the most profound experience capable of human beings, or perhaps anything that's living.
Pierre, thank you for that. We have George now, George, and then Maestro Civetta once more. So George, please unmute.
There it goes. Okay. Pierre, go back to Alcibiades. He saw something in Socrates, called it the God within. So I wonder who Socrates was in the sense, how did Socrates become Socrates? It had to be more than the Delphic Oracle. So that sense of presence, that sense of maybe he discovered something about the self, who knows? But any speculation, how did Socrates become Socrates?
There are certain people in history that are gifts. And how they come to us, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they have immense influence when they appear, as brief as their life may have been. His, of course, was 70 years. But certainly he must have had such teachers.
Yes.
And look what he says, when Plato talks about Socrates, he adds something. He says, Parmenides is perhaps the greatest. I was filled with awe when I first met him. So there were great thinkers in the past. And Socrates is certainly singularly among them, among the greatest. And how the great descend and take part of our culture and join us and give us direction is the path of philosophy. So I don't know what brought him into existence, but I sure thank him for having taken the journey and shared with us his greatness.
Thank you, Pierre. I'm going to take one more question. We could listen to you all night. We're going to have to wrap this up soon. But Maestro, please unmute yourself.
I have a burning question. It's a little bit personal. I hope you don't mind. But what are some of the things that you attribute the vibrancy of your physical and mental longevity?
I haven't got the faintest idea. I give one time, there were several things that did occur in the past. One was, I was in Italy in the 36th Division fighting up there at the casino. And I went on patrol. And we ran into a German unit, and there was a little firefight. And so I had to return. This was at night. But I had to return at a different place obviously from where we left. And so I had to work my way back. I was alone. And I finally made contact with our unit. And one soldier came up to me and he said, "Hey, I want to look at you." And he kept looking at me. He said, "For the last 5 minutes, I had you in my sight. You had no business being here. There was nothing about you I could see. You're American. It's a nice, And by the way, in those days, sometimes I didn't wear a helmet. It was kind of foolish, but in any case, he grabbed me and he said, I want to look at you because I want to know what kept me from shooting you." So I thanked him. That had an interesting impact on me. I had to say, "Gosh, what do you know about that?" He had me in his sights for 5 minutes. I was crawling back, so it wasn't too long a distance. I would say that was rather important way back when. Kept wondering, what did he see in me? Must have been something. So that's all I can offer.
Well, Pierre, I think everybody who's seen you, everybody who's had you in their sights for a couple of minutes sees something pretty special. So that was just the beginning.
Well,
I thought you were going to list foods that you eat or foods that you don't eat or beverages that you drink or beverages that you don't drink or
Oh, Caesar, you're still not satisfied with the mystical. You want the tangible from Pierre. You want to know what he has for dinner. This is
exactly.
Well, I had lasagna last night. And a glass of wine.
There it is, Caesar. You want to live until tomorrow, have lasagna yesterday. This is the key, okay?
By the way.
And the coffee, Eldar. Eldar and Charles remind us it's the coffee. My friends, it's the philosophy. In my view, it's the philosophy that sustains us. It's the ability to be conscious and to be sentient and to be awakened that sustains us. And Pierre, I just, on behalf of everyone, I really want to thank you deeply as a friend and a colleague and a mentor for sharing this time with us. It's been recorded. Eventually, we'll get this up on YouTube also, so others who did not join will be able to benefit. But thank you so much. And everyone, you've made it all possible by being here and sharing this platform. It's been a great inaugural event. Pierre, of course, we're going to invite you back. And next month, we're going to run this every month. Next month, just to announce, I've learned that from Caesar too. You always want to keep everybody primed. We're going to be entertained and educated by another Italian, Massimo Pigliucci, who is my colleague at City College, but has become quite famous for how to live like a Stoic. He has a book on that theme. He's become a practitioner of Stoicism who is pretty renowned, and so he will be gracing us with his insight on the Stoic aspect of Hellenic philosophy right through to the present. So you'll all be notified, you'll all be informed. It's going to be the 27th of March. So we have time now to look more deeply into Pierre's work, which I hope you'll do. And I will announce the next event as we go forward and look forward to seeing everyone. So thank you so much, Pierre and Vona and Lydia, who got into the room, and George and Rick and everyone. It's been a great, great event. And all of our APPA members and all of our new friends who don't need to be members of anything. This is a public event free for everybody who wants to join. So thank you for making it possible for us. Okay, until we meet again, everyone is very grateful, Pierre. Everyone's thanking you for this great experience, and I wish you all a pleasant evening. Eat some lasagna, and then read some philosophy tomorrow, okay? Be well and be safe.
Thank you. Love you all.